champions are some of the most powerful and game-changing cards in Clash Royale. Unlike regular troops, champions come with unique abilities that can completely swing the momentum of a match, turning a losing defense into a devastating counter push in just seconds. Problem is, most players just drop their champion at the bridge and spam the ability button hoping for a miracle, but every champion in the game is actually built for specific situations and requires proper timing, placement, and strategy to get the most value and win you games. And with champions recently being reworked so that they can be cycled, mirrored, and cloned with multiple now allowed in the arena at once, there are more strategies than ever to learn and master if you want to win games. Today we'll go through every champion in Clash Royale, how to actually use them properly, avoid the rookie mistakes, and squeeze out every last bit of value from not only the champions themselves, but each of their unique abilities as well. Before we jump into the first champion, here are a couple of general tips that'll be useful for almost any champion you choose. First off is ability management. Every champion has a special ability that costs between 1 and 3 elixir to activate, and while it can be tempting to use it immediately, you'll often get way more value by waiting for the right moment. Don't waste your ability just because it's available, save it for when it can turn the tide of the battle or create a massive elixir advantage. Second, each champion can use its ability unlimited times as long as it stays alive, with there simply being a cooldown that is different for every champion. The only exception to this would be the boss Bandit, who is only allowed to use her ability twice per spawn. And for the last general tip, champions will now return to your card cycle like normal cards when played, so you don't need to wait for them to go down to play another anymore. That being said, only the most recently played champion will have the option to use their ability, denoted by this crown icon above their head, with the older ones being stripped of this option. Also, as a result of this dynamic, cloned champions are unable to use abilities and will simply attack and deal damage as normal. And with all that out of the way, let's jump into the first champion. The Archer Queen is one of the most versatile champions in the game, and when used correctly, she's an absolute menace on both offense and defense. At 5 elixir, the Archer Queen can target both air and ground units from a safe distance, doing about 14% less damage per second than a musketeer, but having over 38% higher hit points. That already means she gets a ton of value for only 5 elixir, but what really sets her apart is her ability, Cloaking Cape, which costs just 1 elixir to activate and makes her invisible for 3.5 seconds while giving her a massive 180% attack speed boost. This ability is insane for melting tanks and getting huge chip damage on towers, with the Archer Queen firing a total of 7 shots during the ability if she's not interrupted, enough to completely take out troops like the Sparky and Elixir Golem in one go. The key to her ability is timing it right so you don't waste it. For example, if you were to use the ability when the queen is moving and hasn't locked onto anything yet, you'll be wasting the ability since it's time-based, not hit-based. Another thing that's important to note about the ability is that it will decrease the Archer Queen's walking speed by a fair bit. The Archer Queen, although she does have a substantial health advantage over something like the Musketeer, is still somewhat of a glass cannon. As such, she typically works best when paired with tanky units like the Giant or Royal Giant, since she can hide behind them and deal tons of damage safely. On defense, she absolutely shreds through air units like the Balloon or Lava Hound, and her ability can help her take down a huge push before it even crosses the bridge. One thing to keep in mind with the Archer Queen's ability is that it makes her untargetable, not invincible. This means that she can still be hit by spells, including the lightning spell, which is her biggest counter, since it'll take her out in one go even while her ability is active. In addition, this also means that splash cards like the Baby Dragon or Executioner will still damage her if they're attacking something else nearby. The Archer Queen is also great in fast cycle decks, especially since you can now have multiple queens in the arena at once, since the more times you're able to play the queen, the more value you're getting. The Archer Queen's ability is also excellent for taking out goblin barrels, since for 1 elixir she'll avoid any damage on the tower and will also avoid taking damage herself, leading to an easy +2 elixir trade for you. If you do happen to face another player who is also using the Archer Queen and they come face to face, be sure to use your ability after the opponent has used theirs already, since this will always allow your queen to finish theirs off and survive the encounter. As for the queen's biggest weakness outside of the lightning spell, it's swarm units like the Skeleton Army or Goblin Gang, which can overwhelm her since she only targets 1 unit at a time, so make sure you have a spell ready to clear them out if your opponent is using them. The Skeleton King is one of the most unique champions in the game, and he's all about turning deaths into value. At just 4 elixir, he's one of the cheaper champions and is actually pretty tanky, making him incredibly efficient on both offense and defense. The Skeleton King has moderate health and does splash damage with his club, which makes him great at taking out swarms and mini tanks, synergizing incredibly well with his real power, which is in his ability, Soul Summoning. While the Skeleton King is on the field, every troop that dies, whether it's yours or your opponent's, gets collected as a soul, and you can see this by the blue bar that fills up above his health bar. When you activate his ability for 2 elixir, he summons a wave of skeletons around him, and the more souls he's collected, the more skeletons he spawns. These skeletons are spawned over a short period of time instead of all at once, similar to how the graveyard works, which helps make sure your opponent can't just instantly zap them, especially when the king is close to their crown tower. With no souls, he'll summon just 6 skeletons, which can still be okay value in a pinch, but with the maximum of 10 souls, he can summon a massive 16 skeletons that can completely overwhelm your opponent if if they aren't prepared. The key to using the Skeleton King is being patient and letting him collect as many souls as possible before activating the ability, especially if there are a lot of troops dying in the battle. That being said, a halfway charged ability can often be better than no ability, so don't be afraid to use it when the king is in a good spot to get a lot of value, even if the bar isn't quite full yet. Another important thing to know when using the Skeleton King is that he does have an unusually high mass and an unusually large hitbox, meaning he can body block and push past other units like the Hog Rider easier than other champions can. The Skeleton King pairs extremely well with cards like the Graveyard and Skeleton Army, since those create tons of easy deaths that feed into his soul collection, turning him into an absolute monster when the ability goes off. This also allows you to effectively have a quicker cycle with your Graveyard, since the Skeleton King's ability can be used right after your opponent already used their best Graveyard counter. On defense, the Skeleton King is amazing at shutting down single target units like the P.E.K.K.A. or Prince, since his splash damage and the skeletons he summons can keep them locked in place while your towers finish them off. One thing to watch out for is splash troops like the Valkyrie, Wizard, or Executioner, since they can wipe out all the skeletons from his ability almost instantly, making it feel like a waste of 2 elixir. Because of this, it's often better to bait out your opponent's splash cards before using the Skeleton King's ability, or to use skeletons as a distraction while you set up a bigger push. The Mother Witch is also an amazing counter that must be watched out for and avoided when using the Skeleton King, since she will turn all of his skeletons into pigs, which will then distract the king while they take him out. The Golden Knight is all about speed, aggression, and chain attacks that can tear through multiple troops in seconds. At 4 elixir, he's a fast-moving melee unit with solid health and damage, but what makes him special is his ability, Dashing Dash, which only costs 1 elixir. When you activate his ability, the Golden Knight gains a decent movement speed boost if no enemies are nearby, and once he gets close to a target, he dashes to it with invulnerability, then immediately dashes to the next closest enemy within range. He can chain up to 10 dashes in a row, and during each dash, he's completely immune to damage, which makes him extremely hard to stop once he gets going. An interesting thing about this dash is that it can actually be used to reset ramp up damage like the Inferno Tower, or even dodge attacks from cards like the P.E.K.K.A. if timed just right, which can be super clutch for only 1 elixir. This dash ability was actually massively buffed a couple of years ago, where it will now stop once the Golden Knight comes into contact with a tower, meaning it's so much easier to chain onto the tower and then put insane pressure on your opponent as the Golden Knight slashes away. The Golden Knight is a beast at clearing swarms, since he can dash through an entire goblin gang or most of a skeleton army and take them all out for a massive positive elixir trade, since doing this leaves him at full health after. He's also great for punishing your opponent when they overcommit on offense, since you can drop him on the opposite lane and activate his ability to get a ton of tower damage before they can react. One of the best ways to use the Golden Knight is with split lane pressure decks like Royal Hog Recruits, since those other troops will distract and group up the enemy's defensive units and buildings, allowing the Golden Knight to get a ton of value and hopefully even chain to the tower. The Golden Knight can also synergize extremely well with the Tornado, since it can pull everything into a tight cluster and allow the dash to get a lot more value, and also allowing the player to redirect where the dash will end up depending on where they use the Tornado. The biggest thing to avoid is activating the ability too early as your Golden Knight is crossing the bridge, since this will allow your opponent to place a cheap building or ground unit in the middle and defuse his dash, meaning you'll have just wasted 1 elixir. As of a recent patch in May of 2025, the Golden Knight can now dash in a full 360-degree angle around himself, including backwards, which gives him way more flexibility and makes him harder to predict. The Mighty Miner is another unique champion with a very interesting and versatile ability. He combines tank shredding damage with a lane switching ability that can catch your opponent completely off guard. At 4 elixir, he's a ground targeting melee unit with high health, and his damage ramps up over time just like the Inferno Dragon, allowing him to melt through tanks like the Mega Knight or Giant in seconds. What makes him truly special is his ability, Explosive Escape, which costs just 1 elixir to activate and allows him to burrow underground to the horizontally opposite lane while leaving behind a bomb that explodes after 1 second. This bomb deals medium area damage and knocks back both ground and air units, which can be a lifesaver when you're trying to escape a bad matchup or clear out a swarm, especially since the Miner's main attack is really bad against swarms. It is worth noting that the ability will send the Mighty Miner to the exact opposite spot, so if he's close to the middle, he will hardly move, whereas if he's closer to the edge of the arena, he'll completely switch sides. This mechanic can be taken advantage of once the player has already destroyed one of the opponent's crown towers, since the Mighty Miner can then be placed a bit to the side of the pocket and then instantly burrow directly onto the tower, which can be game over if the opponent isn't quick on their feet. The Mighty Miner is amazing on defense, especially against high health units, since his ramping damage can take them out incredibly fast if left unchecked. One of the best ways to use him is to drop him on a tank like the Golem, let him build up his drill damage, then use his ability to escape to the opposite lane and leave his bomb to hopefully clean up the support troops. On On offense, you can use the Mighty Miner to tank for units like the Hog Rider or Wall Breakers, and if things start going south, simply activate his ability to switch lanes and keep the pressure going. His biggest weakness, like other ramp up cards, is getting reset by stun effects like the Zap, Electro Wizard, or Zappies, which will completely reset his damage ramp up and force him to start from scratch. Also beware of opponents who use the Tombstone, since this will completely distract the Mighty Miner, and using his ability won't even help him escape, leading to a guaranteed positive elixir trade for your opponent. The Monk is one of the more defensive-oriented champions in the game, and his ability to reflect projectiles makes him an absolute nightmare for spell-heavy decks or players who use a lot of ranged units like the Musketeer. At 5 elixir, he's a tanky melee unit with solid health and a unique 3-hit combo attack where the third strike deals extra damage and knockback even against units that are normally immune to knockback, similar to the Logs effect. His ability, Pensive Protection, costs just 1 elixir and gives him a massive 80% damage reduction for a short time while reflecting all projectile-based attacks back at their source. This means that spells like the Fireball and Rocket will be reflected back to your opponent's tower, and ranged troops like the Musketeer or Magic Archer will have their shots bounce back at them. All reflected projectiles that can splash or don't seek after a target do 25% of their normal damage to crown towers. For example, if a Sparky shot is reflected and splashes the tower will take 25% damage, but the Sparky will take full damage. The ability is able to reflect projectiles from the opponent's crown towers, but these are also reduced to 25% damage, so it's usually not worth it unless you have other troops in your push that can dish out some good damage while the ability is soaking up the tower's damage output. The Monk is insanely good at countering spell-heavy decks, especially decks with rocket in them like Logbait, since you can activate his ability right before a big spell lands and send all that damage straight back to their tower. He's also great at dealing with ranged pushes, since units like the Flying Machine, Firecracker, or Princess will just end up damaging themselves when they shoot at him during his ability. Another amazing matchup when using the Monk is against siege decks like the Expo and Mortar, since the Monk can easily tank and reflect that incoming damage, frustrating your opponent and making it extremely difficult for them to get tower damage. Timing is everything with the Monk. If you activate his ability too early, you'll waste it on nothing, but if you're too late, you'll take damage before the reflection kicks in. The Monk's biggest weakness is that his ability doesn't work against non-projectile damage, which means cards like the Poison, Lightning, Freeze, Earthquake, and Zap can't be reflected. Melee units are also a problem, since they can just walk right up and hit him without worrying about any reflection, and swarm units can overwhelm him if you don't have a spell ready. The Little Prince is the cheapest champion in the game at only 3 elixir, and he brings a ton of utility for such a low cost. He's a single target ranged ground troop that can attack both air and ground units, and what makes him unique is that his attack speed increases dramatically the longer he stays still without moving, effectively making it similar to the ramp up damage of an Inferno Tower. The difference though is that this ramp up damage carries over between targets as long as the Little Prince isn't moving, which means if you can keep him in one spot, he'll start firing arrows crazy fast, shredding through swarms and support troops with ease. His ability, Royal Rescue, costs a whopping 3 elixir and summons a Guardian unit that charges into battle, dealing knockback to any enemies in her path and taking damage for the Little Prince. This knockback is again similar to the Monk and the Log, since it affects all units no matter how heavy. The Guardian has solid health and damage similar to that of a Knight, and she's perfect for both defending against pushes and supporting your own attacks. Since you're essentially getting a Log plus a Knight for 3 elixir, the ability can get a ton of value if timed correctly, but it can also be kind of a waste if nothing gets caught in the Guardian's dash. Since the ability is so expensive, it's even more important to keep in mind that you don't have to use the ability every time you play the card, since the Little Prince can get plenty of value without the ability, so really try to only use it when you have a reason to. One of the best ways to use the Little Prince is to place him near the bridge on defense, let him ramp up his attack speed as he deals with incoming troops, then use the Royal Rescue ability as soon as anything gets too close to him. The Little Prince is amazing at dealing with air troops like the Balloon, Minions, or Baby Dragon, since his ramping attack speed allows him to take them out quickly before they can do much damage to him. He's also great in cycle decks, since his low cost makes it easy to get him back in rotation, and having multiple on the board at once can dish out insane damage. One way to prevent the Little Prince from moving around, therefore preserving his ramp up damage, is by using the Tornado to pull units away right before they can hit the Little Prince, since this will often cause them to be completely destroyed due to being targeted by the full force of the Little Prince's attack for a long duration. Spells like the Lightning can take him out instantly, so don't rely on him too heavily if your opponent has those in their deck, but also keep in mind that this is a horrible trade for your opponent unless you're giving them a lot of extra value when they're using those spells. Also, look out for players using the Bowler, since he'll constantly knock back the Little Prince and never allow him to deal any respectable damage. Goblinstein is a pretty unique card, since he actually spawns 2 separate units when deployed, the Monster and the Doctor. At 5 elixir, he's a solid mid to high cost champion, and the way he works is that the Monster is a building targeting tank similar to the Giant, while the Doctor is a ranged support unit that can attack both air and ground troops with a short stun effect. The Doctor's stun lasts for half a second, the same as a zap on each hit, which can interrupt enemies' attacks and reset targeting, making him incredibly annoying to deal with, especially since he's is usually tanked for by the monster. Goblinstein's ability, Lightning Link, costs 2 elixir and creates an electric chain between the doctor and the monster that shocks any enemies within 2 tiles of the link every half second. This ability deals massive damage over its duration, and it's perfect for clearing swarms like the skeleton army and goblin gang if you can catch them all in the link. One of the best ways to use Goblinstein is to place him in the middle of the arena so that the monster and doctor split into opposite lanes, creating dual lane pressure that your opponent has to defend against. Just remember to support the doctor with a mini tank like the knight so he doesn't get taken out too easily. You can also place him directly on one lane if you want to create a massive push, and the lightning link ability will clear out any defensive troops your opponent tries to use, giving the monster a clear path to the tower. On defense, Goblinstein is amazing at shutting down big pushes, since the doctor's stun effect can reset charge units like the Prince or Ram Rider, and the lightning link can wipe out support troops behind a tank. Since the monster is building targeting, he will keep walking forward and not be distracted by other units, allowing you to wait for the correct time to use the ability when there are a bunch of units between the monster and the doctor. Even if the monster dies, he drops an antenna on the ground that the doctor can still connect to with the lightning link, so the ability remains useful even after the bigger part of your champion is gone. The biggest weakness of Goblinstein is that if your opponent can take out the doctor first, you lose access to the lightning link ability entirely, which removes most of his value. Spells like the lightning are great counters since they can snipe the doctor from a safe distance, and high damage troops like the mini P.E.K.K.A. can take him out quickly if played correctly. Another thing to watch out for is that Goblinstein is expensive at 7 total elixir when you include the ability, so you need to make sure you're getting good value out of him by using him strategically and only when you have an elixir advantage or at least even with your opponent. The boss bandit is the most expensive champion in the game at 6 elixir, but she packs an absolute punch with her high damage and dash mechanics. Just like the regular bandit, she'll charge towards enemies that are between 3.5 and 6 tiles away, dealing double damage with her dash and becoming invulnerable while dashing. What sets her apart is her ability, Getaway Grenade, which costs 1 elixir and can be used only twice per deployment. When activated, she goes invisible for 1 second and teleports 6 tiles backwards, which lets her avoid damage and set up another dash on the same target. This ability is perfect for baiting out your opponent's counters since you can dash in, force them to use troops to defend, then teleport back and dash again before they can react. The boss bandit is an absolute monster at taking out tanky units like the Valkyrie, Knight, or mini P.E.K.K.A. since her double dash capability lets her shred through them with ease. She's also great for applying pressure on both offense and defense, as her high health pool means she can tank a lot of damage while dealing a lot of damage as well. One of the best ways to use the boss bandit is to wait until your opponent overcommits on one lane, then drop her on the opposite lane and use her dashes to get massive tower damage before they can defend properly. Her ability also lets her dodge big spells like the rocket or lightning if you time it right, which can save you a ton of value and keep her alive for a strong counter push. When doing this against a rocket, the timing is pretty easy due to the rocket's slow speed, but keep in mind that the ability will only activate about 1 second after you press the button, followed by another delay of about 0.9 seconds for the boss bandit to actually complete her backwards movement. The boss bandit's biggest weakness is that she's expensive, so if your opponent can counter her efficiently with cheap cards, you'll end up at a huge elixir deficit. Swarm units like the skeleton army or goblin gang can also shut her down if you don't have a spell ready, and buildings like the cannon or Tesla can pull her into the middle and waste her dashes. Another thing to watch out for is that if she's too close to a target, she'll just walk up and hit it instead of dashing, which means you'll lose the extra damage and invulnerability that makes her so strong. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you want to see how to properly use every building, click this video.